Hello again. This is Nick Lodato with the seventh in the series on creating accessible documents in Word. Today's topic is contrast. So what is contrast? Contrast is the difference in lighting, brightness, hue between any two colors or shades that makes them distinguishable from one another. Now, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, they define measures for that distinguishability called a contrast ratio and define what that contrast ratio should be in order for the content to be accessible to people with low vision. And there are a number of tools that are available to help you determine, other than just sort of judging it by your own eye, the contrast ratio between any two colors or shades. So that's our agenda for today. And let's start. So here we have a document that actually tries to kill two birds with one stone. It talks about contrast, but it also is going to illustrate some of the ideas in contrast. So first, again, our definition taken from Wiktionary. You'll get similar definitions with other dictionaries. The key is that in order for, and we're going to talk primarily about text on backgrounds here. This also applies to images, although the numbers are slightly different for images, and we will talk about that later. And we'll focus today, too, mainly on shades of gray, which is what you typically get in a document with some minor coloring. But we're not going to focus that much on the contrast differences between colors. We'll do that next time. For text to be accessible to people with low vision, you have to have sufficient contrast. And there's a way to measure that contrast because every color could be broken down according to a number, series of numbers actually. There are different schemes for explaining numerically what a number is. The most common is the RGB scale, which gives you three numbers that determine the amounts of red, green, and blue that make up the image on a computer screen. But there's also something called the hex value, which is three hexadecimal numbers. You don't really need to know the mathematics of hexadecimal numbers, but you need to be able to recognize that a color has a numeric equivalent, and we can use that numeric equivalent to calculate whether or not the difference in contrast is accessible. I have here the URL of a website from WebAIM. Again, you've heard of WebAIM before in this podcast. It's Web Accessibility in Mind. It's an organization that promotes information about accessibility. They offer in their resources subdirectory, so it's webaim.org/resources/contrast checker. They offer a means to check that contrast. We'll show you that in a little bit. Now, the guidelines that I mentioned before from WCAG say that there should be a contrast ratio between foreground and background, if you consider text in the foreground and the background is whatever color it is, of 4.5 to 1. Now, this is, most people don't like these fractions and ratios. That's for what's called normal text. And I have some examples here about what might be normal text. This text is rendered in 10-point font called Callisto MT. It's one of my favorite fonts, and that's considered normal text, as is the next. That's in 12-point. And this is 14-point Callisto font, still considered normal. As soon as you bold that or go higher, like in this 14-point bold case or this 18-point case, that's considered larger text. And larger text needs to be less distinguishable. 3:1 contrast ratio will work for that. So let's look at some examples now. So here's a table, properly formatted, that gives us in the first column a set of examples. They all have black text, and that's considered the foreground. So as you see here, that's the information, the RGB numbers, all zeros, the hex numbers, all zeros. That defines black text. So the black text is over here. But the background text we're going to change. So from the example of black text on pure white background, that is a 21:1 contrast ratio, and it works beautifully in terms of contrast. If you stick with black on white, you'll never have a problem with contrast. So here we've added a background tint of gray that has these values, RGB values and hex values. And you can see that it had some slight impact on the contrast ratio. It's lower, but it still passes. This is the kind of thing that I typically do to highlight the heading row in a table. You can get darker and it can still pass. So this is an 11.4, that should say, to 1 contrast ratio. Sorry about the typo there. And yet darker and still pass. It passes the normal standard, which is called AA, but it fails for normal text. For regular text, it fails what's called the AAA standard, which is a much more robust standard. Very few websites, for instance, actually meet AAA standards. So this is probably still acceptable for all practical purposes. But as you can see, as you move from the pure black on white through the gray phases, it gets a little harder to distinguish the text against the background. When we move here, this is pretty much at the edge, 4.5. Remember, 4.5 to 1 was the ratio we wanted. This is 4.55. It still technically passes normal AA standards and large AA standards, but it fails again at AAA standards. Now when we get even darker as the background, we finally fail at 3.39 to 1. We fail the contrast test for normal text. And of course, the large still passes, but it now fails the AAA. Here's another example, which gets down to about 3:1 ratio, which, if you recall, was the place where normal text would fail. 3:1, it fails. This is 2.99. And you can see it's still more of a struggle to distinguish the black letters on that dark gray. And we'll end here. This is pretty tough to see for most people. If I highlight it, it doesn't help. Both of them fail. So that's just to give you an idea of contrast. The contrast level between foreground and background affects your ability to read it, to see it. Now, one more thing before we leave this, and that is, how do you get these numbers? Well, there are tools that let you pick a color from a screen or a website and report to you the RGB number or the hex number or both. But they're also available built into Word. So I'm going to highlight this box and go to the place where one installs that or invokes that shading. So when you do this, this is determining the background colors, as you can see as I scroll around it. Now these are the sort of standard theme colors. These are standard colors. You could get rid of color altogether, or you can go to what's called more colors. Now more colors gives you this palette of all the colors that you ever want to come in contact with. Again, you could go from standard to custom. And on this palette, it actually shows you what the RGB values are, as well as the hex value. So this is where I pulled these values from, 191, 191, 191. That's because they're shades of gray. You'll see if you move this around, those numbers changing and the color showing up here. So this is how you get to determine what those are. By the way, the same thing is true for the text. You have the same kind of determination here that this text was black text and it's all zeros. That's what defines black text. One final thing to do here. I'm going to highlight this whole column and make a change to the font to change the font color to automatic. And what you'll, it lied to me. Here we go. This it still considered acceptable, Word did. This it found it crossed the line, so it changed by automatic setting on font color, changed the color to white because it knows that this is barely distinguishable by anyone. I'm a little surprised that it didn't work on this paragraph, which fails both normal and large text, but it certainly kicked in here. So I had originally, let me reverse that, excuse me, Control Z reverses it. I had originally forced the color to be black for all the text in this document. And if I turn that off and it goes to automatic, you can see that it changes the foreground color so that it's more readable. That's one of those automatic things that Word does. And that's the main point for today. In summary, this standard from WCAG requires at least a 4.5 to 1 contrast ratio for normal text, 3 for large text. There are tools to let you find out what those colors are, and as you can see, it's built into Word for certain things like the background color and the text color. There are also third-party applications that will just run. This is one that runs on the Windows Store. One runs on a Windows PC from Microsoft.com store. It's called Free Color Picker. You can search for that, and it's a free package. And this one, the WebAIM one, is available on the web. Now, many of the tools from WebAIM work on the web, but this tool is kind of a neat tool. Basically, you input the code for foreground color and background color. So if we move this to white, you'll see white on white is a horrible contrast ratio. You can't see anything. If the background is white and the text is black, that's your 21 to 1 contrast ratio. So you can play with this and find values that work for you. As you can see, when I hit this number, we went from pass to fail as soon as we got under this number 4.1 for AA, and the AAA standards are more robust. So this is a very, very valuable tool. Again, it's webaim.org resources/contrast checker. Very valuable tool for determining contrast. That's all for today. As usual, drop me a line if you have any questions or comments. Thank you very much. Till next time.